So good morning. Welcome to the Humanist community in Silicon Valley's Sunday Forum. My name is Matt Courtney, and I am a recorder and a member of the board of the Humanist community. The Humanist community is a chapter of the American Humanist Association. Humanism is a reality-based philosophy of life that affirms our ability and responsibility to lead ethical lives of personal fulfillment that aspire to the greater good. We value freedom, health, happiness, fairness, compassion, and using science and reason to acquire and apply knowledge. If these words describe your thinking, we invite you to become a member of the Humanist community if you have not already done so. Membership forms are available on our website at humanists.org. If you are listening for the first time, welcome, and we invite you to continue listening to our weekly forums and other events. You can find all our events listed on the website humanists.org. That's humanists plural. Please aid us in continuing to present these forums by donating to the Humanist community. You can find out how to donate to our organization, again, on the website humanists.org. So the talk today is Race, Police, and Prisons, the American Gulag by Dr. Sharat G. Lin. Dr. Lin is with the San Jose Peace and Justice Center, Human Agenda, Initiative for Equality, and the Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. Legacy Committee. He writes and lectures on global political economy, labor migration, social movements, and public health. So Dr. Lin, looks like you're all unmuted and ready to go, so go ahead and take it away.
Well, thank you very much, Matthew, and thank you to all the members of the Humanist community in Silicon Valley for having me again. It's always a pleasure to come back and speak to you folks. Today's talk, as Matt has just said, is about race, police, and prisons in the United States. And of course, this is the central issue, or issues surrounding the protests that have been with us since the end of May. And so it's, we sometimes think of it as the Black Lives Matter protest, but of course it is the death of George Floyd on May 25th set off. It was a trigger. It was a trigger, and some would say that it was the straw that broke the camel's back, that set off a continuous series of protests in almost every city and town, certainly in Northern California, and the issues that some of these protests have taken up are not necessarily Black Lives Matter, but they're related. For example, the campaigns to abolish ICE, which is the Immigration and Customs Enforcement that tries to go and sweep up undocumented immigrants and break up families. It has triggered protests against the incarceration system, the fact that we have a very, very punitive system, and as you'll see in my talk, it's what we do in this country is not the norm by any means in the world, even though we call ourselves we call ourselves a democracy, and of course there are some in this country who would still insist that the United States is the world's greatest democracy. And, I think we each will have to make our own judgment about whether that is true or not. So I'm going to, start sharing my slides here. And what you see here in the scene here is a demonstration that this was the first day, May 29th of Black Lives Matter protests following the death of George Floyd, and this was in San Jose. And in fact, this was remarkable because usually Oakland or San Francisco are the first places to have a protest like this in response to a police killing. And instead, San Jose actually had one first, and it wasn't until the evening of the same day that there was the first Black Lives Matter protest in Oakland to protest the death of George Floyd. And in the evening, it turned into this, and of course this was the next day, but it was very similar the previous day in San Jose, where the police came out in force. And as you can see, what they did is that you see all the smoke in the air, and that's not from wildfires, that's tear gas. And there's also a vehicle in the sort of center right, a taller vehicle than the others, which is an armored vehicle. And there were two of these that were brought out into the streets of San Jose. And you can see that on the top there's some kind of a structure, and that's part of the turret that is on top. So this vehicle is actually built for the military to be used as a gunnery an armored gunnery vehicle with a gun turret on top, a light gun turret. And for police use, what they do is they just don't mount the gun on it, but still there's a shield there. So a policeman can stand up in the hole in the roof of the vehicle behind the shield and do surveillance or even shoot at people from that turret. So it's an example of a vehicle that was built for the military that is being used or repurposed for police. And it sort of illustrates the militarization of our police forces. And this is not just in big cities. I mean, there's small cities like Santa Clara, like Hayward, that have these kinds of vehicles. Another thing that we see, and these only seem to come out during protests, and in addition to tear gas, is something called kinetic impact rounds. So these are also known as rubber bullets, except that they're not. When you say rubber bullets, one thinks of something that's soft, but in fact, rubber bullets are not soft. They're actually a hard plastic cover and the steel inside, and so these can still cause some rather marked injuries, and people have even been killed even when they're hit in the head. People have lost eyes from being hit by these kinetic impact rounds. And the other thing I want to point out here is that you see the belt or the strap that this gun has is orange, and this is very common in U.S. police forces, that any time that an anti-riot weapon, a sort of non-standard patrol weapon, is in use, it has this orange strap. So wherever you see the orange strap, you know that policeman is carrying some kind of a riot control weapon. Could be tear gas, could be a kip, could be a flashbang grenade launcher. So there was a whole round of arrests on the first few nights. The San Jose, the mayor declared a curfew in San Jose, and then there was a curfew in Oakland as well. And the city councils in these cities later on reviewed that policy and decided to rescind the the curfews, because they were resulting in a lot of unnecessary arrests, and then even after that, even I was arrested, and this is a photograph of my arrest a week later during the protests, and all I was doing was doing a light show on the side of City Hall. The building behind me is the rotunda, and I'm the one in the black hoodie, by the way, if that wasn't obvious. And the police charged me with aiming a laser at their helicopter, and of course that's totally untrue. But the light show was aimed at City Hall, and because there were 1,000, anywhere from 1,000 to 2,000 protesters still in City Hall Plaza, and they were dancing and trying to entertain themselves in that evening. And the problem here, of course, is that the police interpret anything, or try to interpret anything, as a threat. And so even if the laser is not aimed at them, they see it as soon as they see a laser beam. They think, this might be a laser gun sight, and so we've got to take it out. And so this is a very common reason why police overreact, and we end up with, I mean, in my case it was not lethal, but in so many other cases we have a lethal result from police over responding to what's going on around them. So we're still many of the charges have been dropped, mostly those for curfew violations, but still there are other people who have charges pending, and we must demand that the charges be dropped against all of them. And when I say protesters, I mean people who are really protesting. I don't count people who go and break windows and loot as protesters. They are not protesters. Now, Black Lives Matter. Black Lives Matter began in 2013, but it was not until the police killing in Ferguson, Missouri, that it really took off. And this was certainly the case in San Jose, because the first Black Lives Matter protests were launched in the summer of 2014, right after Ferguson. But the interesting thing is that these protests were started by mostly transgender youths, and most of them were not even Black. Now, of course, in San Jose, there's a reason for that, and that's because of the demographics. The Black population in San Jose and Santa Clara County is only about 2.6%, but youths, regardless of their color, felt the injustice that was done, and so they felt a passion to act and protest against these police killings. This is just another view of the same protest. Now, the public opinion has shifted dramatically since then. When those protests started in San Jose in 2014, the majority of Americans thought that Black Lives Matter was some fringe idea, and it was divisive, and it was trying to say that Black Lives Matter meant more than other lives. And so a lot of people said, well, wait a minute, all lives matter. But the problem here with with saying all lives matter, of course, is that is that it's like saying that, well, we should give an equal opportunity for students. We should have colorblind admissions into our universities. In other words, we admit students without any regard to their color or ethnic group. And what that does is it blinds us to the existing systemic inequality. The fact that Blacks and Native Americans and Latinos in this country are underrepresented in our educational system. They're underrepresented in skilled jobs. They're underrepresented in management. Same thing with women. And if we are colorblind, or we turn a blind eye to that fact, we will never correct it. And so Black Lives Matter is a way of saying that Black Lives Matter, which have not mattered. This is the problem, is that in the criminal justice system, they have not mattered. And we need to assert that they matter, that they matter as much as any other lives. And so when Black Lives matter, then all lives matter. Now, public opinion has shifted very dramatically because over time, we now have smartphones, and these incidents of police killings, some of them very brutal, are getting recorded on smartphones and then posted online. They go viral, and it has taken a long time. It has taken 6 years for well, actually more than that, because there were videos before that. But the point is, from the beginning of Black Lives Matter till now, 7 years. That people have been seeing these videos over and over again, and to the point where we realize that this is not something unusual, but this is a very common occurrence. And in fact, so after George Floyd was killed, which is right around here, at the far right of the curve, there's just this spike. So what this curve is showing is the net support. So anything above the line, the baseline, there's a net support of at the very far right. There's a net support of almost 30%. In other words, there are 30% more people who support Black Lives Matter than oppose it. And there's a poll by the New York Times. So very, very dramatic shift. The number of people shot to death by police by race is you can see that in the absolute numbers, sure, there are more whites who are killed than Blacks and Hispanics. But if you normalize that to population, then you see that the probability of a Black person getting killed by police is 3 times more. And it depends on what statistics there are some cases where in some states where that number is 7 times more than for white people. And for Latinos, it can be anywhere from 1.3 to 1.5 times more likely to be killed by police than for a white person. Not only that, but I don't have that one here. The likelihood that these Blacks or Latinos are armed is actually lower than it is for whites. And so clearly there's something consistent that is going on here. Another way of looking at it is look at the police killing rates. So these are factored to population, and then ask yourself, well, does this have anything to do with the prevalence of violent crime? And as you can see, these are for different cities, and I've highlighted on the bottom in yellow the cities that are in California, and you see the California cities are are all over the place. Long Beach has a very high police killing rate. The Bay Area cities, San Francisco, Oakland, San Jose, are at the lower end. And you see an amazing thing that has happened in New York City is that New York City has really turned things around, in the sense it wasn't always this way, but it has one of certainly the lowest rate of police killings for a large city in the United States. And these rates have nothing to do with the rates of violent crime in these cities. A number of people killed by police by state, and of course California is the largest state, but you can see that even when you consider population in California, even though we are a blue state, the rate of police killings in California is not low. It's not. We are as guilty of this in this very blue state as any of the red states. Incarceration rates. Okay, so incarceration rates, we see a very similar pattern where blacks are incarcerated at a rate, and again, this is factored to population, at rates that are many times higher than the rates for whites. Native Americans have a much higher rate. Latinos or Latinx people have rates that are almost double the rate for whites, and this is consistent. This has been going on for decades, and so we really need to understand the roots of systemic racism in our criminal justice system. Now, some of the work that I have done, I this is not in my field. I'm not specializing in criminal justice, but I started becoming involved with this back in the late 2000s when I met some people who were doing cop watch in San Jose, and some of them were with the San Jose Peace and Justice Center itself, and they felt that okay, we should really spend more time looking in particular at Cinco de Mayo, because there's a lot of police activity that takes place on Cinco de Mayo, which of course is a Chicano or Mexican American day of celebration, and if the day doesn't fall on the weekend, it actually spans over several days between May 1st and May 5th. And I went out there for several years, and sure enough, discovered that there are these checkpoints in the middle of the street. So you've got police on the curbside, and you've got police in the median stopping cars at random. And you think, well, maybe these stops are because they saw some kind of violation. Either the flags that are coming out of the cars are dangerously extended beyond the car, or the car registration is out of date. But this was an example. I photographed this, and then I didn't see anything wrong, but this car was stopped in the middle of the street, and then I took this photograph home and looked at in close up. This is a zoom up of the same photograph, and you can see what this police officer is holding in his hand. He's clearly holding 3 California driver's licenses. So that means he has stopped his car, and he's asked for the driver's licenses of all the people in the car, not just the driver, but the passengers. And 2009 was still a time when police were and jail authorities were handing people who were arrested over to ICE. And so what they were doing was that they were holding people on the suspicion of being undocumented. So in those days, you couldn't get a driver's license if you were undocumented, and so the practice of asking for driver's licenses is a way of kind of screening for people who might be undocumented. And so I wrote over two years. I wrote 2 articles, news articles on what was happening at Cinco de Mayo, published them on Indie Media, and the next year, so this was end of 2010. San Jose had a new police chief. His name was Chris Moore, and he held a public meeting. And after the meeting, I went up to him and I handed him copies of the 2 articles that I had written about San Jose police handling of Cinco de Mayo, and I asked him, "Are you aware of this problem?" And he said no, because it was new. He said, "No, but I'll look into it." And the next year, May 2011, this problem went away. So obviously he looked into it and said, "This is totally unnecessary. This makes no sense," and stopped that practice. So it's one of my, I guess, great success stories that I did something small and it resulted in a big change for the Mexican American community in San Jose, which is almost a third of San Jose's population. Now, the next example is in 2017. This was on the eve of Mr. Trump's inauguration, and there were protests in San Jose, January 20th. And there were 3 protests. One was by a group of activists, of which I was a part, mostly of color. And we organized a protest that was met by police surveillance from the rooftops like this. And we don't know what these police officers had below the wall. They may have had weapons. We know that some of them did, and this was taken from the City Hall tower of San Jose, and you see police here with a lot of military gear, and you can't see it too well, but the photographer who took this said that they had high-powered weapons, and they were snipers, basically ready to shoot in case they were ordered to from high up. They had, again, you see the orange straps, so these are riot control weapons, either tear gas or tips, and this is the same kind of thing that we saw during the BLM protests in this year, the orange straps. And so that was the way that protest was handled. Now, another one, which was by youth, was even worse. And so what the police did was that they, without any warning, there was no warning to get off the street. They took their motorcycles and rammed them into the legs of these protesters to push them off the street. And then they arrested 3 of them. And finally, we have the Women's March, organized by middle-aged white women. And it was like a holiday. Police were smiling, they were waving at children, and they were doing what they should be doing, which is keeping pedestrians and vehicular traffic separated. And it was a total difference. So you see that there is, police have respond very differently to very different people and very different organizers. And Now, I want to point out that you see these police in our streets, and particularly during times of protest, where they're armed to the teeth. And that practice of first of all, giving every police officer a gun, we think it's normal because that's what all police officers in this country have. And but that's not the case. So here in Japan, you see we have two kinds of police. You see the dark blue helmets and the light blue helmets, and neither of them are armed. They don't have guns. They have a lot of what do you call them? Bulletproof vests, maybe padding. It's probably more padding because Japan simply is not an armed society. It's very, very, very difficult to get a license to buy a gun in Japan. And so it's largely an unarmed society, both police and civilians. Here again, you see two different kinds of police in Japan, and both of them are unarmed in response to a protest. Here in Egypt, now Egypt, which has long been known as a very authoritarian state. Certainly for the 30 years of Mubarak's rule, when this photograph was taken, and even more so now. And you have the regular police, and the rank and file police do not carry guns. Only the officers do. In this case, when there is a protest, another force is brought out called the Central Security Force, and they have large numbers of officers, and they're totally unarmed. And their purpose is just to provide manpower and to surround a protest, to sort of create a human wall around it to contain it, and also to shield it from view from the outsiders. So even in Egypt, it's mostly unarmed police. Here in Turkey, we have two different kinds of police. You see the blue helmets and the white helmets, and the white helmets are armed, and the blue helmets are not. So you see that not every police officer has a gun, and the reason for that is that they have two different purposes. So there's the unarmed police officers do what they can, and they only call in the armed officers if the situation calls for it, if they're facing something that is life-threatening. In China, and in this country, we hear a lot about China as an authoritarian state, but most of the police in China are not armed. And this is in Beijing. This police officer is in Tiananmen Square, and he has three things. He has a baton, which is on the ground behind him. He has a fire extinguisher that is that red thing behind the shield, and he has a shield. And so those are the only things that he carries with him. Now, in a place where there is a police state, namely in Xinjiang, where there has been the Uyghur uprising and independence movement, we would say that there is a police state. There's a tremendous amount of surveillance. But even there, where there is repression, police patrol in triplets, in threes. And each one of these police officers carries a different thing. So one has a gun, you can see the gun. One has a shield, and the third one has a baton. so the fact that only one police officer has a gun means that that police officer has to think twice before using it. And he also has more training about not using it. North Korea. Now, North Korean police, if they're carrying a gun, they have to have a belt, because the gun is holstered to the belt. And the police officers patrol in pairs, and one has a belt and the other one does not. So there's only one gun here. So the fact that again, police, having a gun is, and if you go to Europe, it's even more so. India, most police do not carry guns, and so what we have, the practice we have here in the United States is actually an outlier in the world. There's been a lot of talk in the Black Lives Matter movement about disbanding the police, defund the police. And I want to say this about defunding the police. What does it mean? Because a lot of people don't understand, just the slogan. But it's intended to start the discussion about reducing the size of police departments and converting many of their functions to social service agencies, to mental health, to providing housing, reducing drug and alcohol addiction. All of these would reduce the need for police. And if you stop and think about it, the things that police are asked to respond to, there are many things that do not require an armed officer to do so many of these things. And but beyond that is the concept of that we need a very radical change in order to stop police brutality, to stop police killings of unarmed Black and brown people. And so Minneapolis, after the death of George Floyd, actually passed a resolution saying that they intend to disband the Minneapolis Police Department. Doesn't mean that they would get rid of police, but they would dismantle the police department as it exists and create new institutions for community safety. And sure, there will be some police officers who will have guns, but they will be brought in only as a last resort, and most of the functions of police today would be farmed out to other agencies or other sections of a community safety department that would involve unarmed personnel. Camden, New Jersey is a pioneer in the sense that it actually did disband its police department. Camden, New Jersey is just across the river from Philadelphia, a city of 75,000. And they had one of the highest violent crime rates in the country when factored to population. And after disbanding their police department and reconstructing public safety institutions, they dropped that violent crime rate way down. So it was a success story. Unfortunately, the process of reconstructing the police department got derailed and resulted in kind of merging the city police with the county, and it's still better than before, but it's tending towards going part way back to traditional policing. But it's an experiment that we need to learn from, and shows that there is a way that we can do this, not only in other countries, but right here in the United States. There's been a lot of talk after George Floyd about what we can do to reform policing in this country. So one of those, and you may have heard of it, is 8 Can't Wait, with this hashtag. And 8 Can't Wait is about 8 reforms of policing. So this is not about deconstructing policing, but reforming it, banning chokeholds, requiring de-escalation, require warning before shooting. A lot of these are already standard procedures in police departments, and there are also other police departments that have implemented some of these after George Floyd. Exhaust all alternatives before shooting, and some of these that's in the procedure books, but how you train police officers to implement it is another matter. So there's still a matter of refining the training so that the words are actually put into practice. The duty to intervene. So what this is about when one police officer is doing something that is clearly contrary to procedure or may even be illegal. It is the duty of other police officers to intervene and stop, or at least intervene to try to change the behavior of that police officer. The reason that this doesn't work in practice is because there's a code of silence among police officers. They feel the social pressure that if you're working together, you just don't snitch on one of your colleagues. But this reform is trying to change that. How it will be done is not clear. But ban on shooting at moving vehicles, particularly when they're moving away. I mean, if a vehicle is coming at you, at the police officer, there's conceivable justification. But if the vehicle is fleeing, what is the point of shooting at it, right? Establish use of force continuum, which is this continuum from no force to lethal force. Use only as much as is necessary. It's a concept that comes from the military. Require all use of force to be reported. So these are some of the reforms. Now, when I read those, I said, okay, there's a lot of things that are missing. So this is my sort of response to 8 Can't Wait. And the top row is basically about oversight, so civilian oversight. And so what this is about, I mean, in many cities like Berkeley and Oakland, there is a civilian police review commission. In San Jose, there's the independent police auditor. And the independent police auditor in San Jose, unfortunately, has very, very limited powers. They can look into things, but they don't have access to the police records that internal affairs within the police department has, and they have no power to get it or subpoena it. But here, what we're talking about, I think, is the need for civilian review commissions like exist in Oakland and Berkeley. Independent investigation, so that means giving the IPA or the civilian review commissions the power to investigate, the power to get records, the power to know what the police know. Community training of police means that police should not be trained by other police experts, because they teach the same thing over and over again to every police department in the country. And some of the training comes, in fact, from Israeli police. But Israel is the largest exporter of police training in the world, and but there's a component of training that needs to come from the community. In other words, the police need to know what the concerns of the community are. Why does the community, in many cases, fear the police, particularly the immigrant community? You know, how do members of the community react when police officers are armed, and so on. So this is a kind of training, sensitivity training, and more that we need to have, and can only come from the community. Safety officers of the community, and this is basically saying that, okay, what we need to do is, instead of having police who live, you know, outside of the community and don't have a connection to that community, we need people who come from that community, who become public safety officers, whose primary role is to prevent hazards, to prevent injury, to prevent death, and to serve the community in ways that the community has confidence in. The next two on the lower line are demilitarize the community and demilitarize the police. Now, you know that there are two movements in this country. One of them is about what's commonly known as gun control, which is about, you know, limiting the availability of guns, and particularly assault weapons, in the civilian population. The other one is basically that police don't need all the kinds of militaristic weapons that they have, and we ought to get rid of them. And I see this as really two sides of the same coin. It's militarization on two sides. And in order for us to be like Japan, we have to have fewer weapons, not only in the hands of police, but also in the hands of the community. So these two campaigns actually go hand in hand. And so I say that gun control and demilitarization of police ought to be merged into one campaign, one movement, to achieve both. Next is the abolish the need for dominance, which is that the police are trained to go into a situation and establish police dominance, police control. It's part of the whole concept of law and order, and that causes a lot of friction, a lot of unnecessary responses. And so this is an area of training. And the fourth one is enable snitching. This is the golden snitch. But we have to, and I don't. This is the one that I have difficulty. I think it's going to require some work to figure out how we can implement it, because it's going to take more than just training to get police officers to snitch on their fellow officers when they do wrong. But it's something we have to work on. Now, beyond reform is something known as aid to abolition. And you have heard probably the word abolition quite a bit. And this starts the discussion with defund the police, demilitarize communities. So it's an extension of what I just said was missing. Remove police from schools. Now this is one where we've already made progress, because there are a number of major school districts, including Alum Rock and Eastside Union School District, that have already decided to remove police from schools, to eliminate what's known as the school resource officer program, whereby the schools pay for the police department to post a police officer full-time at mostly high schools. And this was also done because a number of school districts in Oakland have also done this, and other cities around the Bay Area have done this. free people from prisons and jails. Do we need to have so many people in jails? Do we need such long prison sentences? Do we need 3 strikes in California? Just to give you an overall picture, in the United States, 2.3 million people are incarcerated at any given time. Right now, it's a little bit less because of the COVID-19 pandemic, and that a few thousand prisoners in the Bay Area have been released because they were nonviolent, and they would, if they were there, the jails would be overcrowded. But we really need to look at, no other country incarcerates this many people. And I'll get into a little more of that later. Repeal laws criminalizing survival. So that means police going in and arresting people who are houseless. Makes no sense. Houseless people have no choice. They're on the streets because they don't have a house, and they shouldn't be subject to arrest. Invest in community self-governance. When communities, and I'm not talking about just cities, I'm talking about neighborhoods, have neighborhood organizations where neighborhoods make small decisions and organize themselves for community safety, for keeping an eye on things, and a lot more. The need for armed police will decline rather substantially. Provide safe housing for everyone. It's part of the homeless issue. Invest in care, not cops. So this means the mental health, the social services, and so on. So I'm coming back to incarceration. The U.S. has the world's highest incarceration rate, about 690 per 100,000 population, and even China and India have much smaller prison populations. If you take the 5 largest countries on earth, namely China, India, United States, Indonesia, and Brazil, the United States, with 2.3 million prisoners, has more prisoners than the other 4 put together. And those other 4 have 10 times the population of the United States. There's only one country on earth that has ever held more prisoners at a given time than the US does today. And guess which country that was? It was Nazi Germany. Think about that. Prisons in some countries, particularly in the North European countries, are designed for rehabilitation, and they're not. It's punishment in the sense that you don't have freedom, but it's not designed to harden you into a criminal. I mean, you go into a prison in the U.S. and if you're there for any length of time, if you weren't a real criminal, you often come out as a criminal because of the influences and because of the harsh conditions. Not only that, but like here in Finland and other parts of Scandinavia, the lower security prisoners, they go and shop for their own food. They take responsibility for making their own meals and then cleaning up. And that teaches, it reinforces being independent, which U.S. prisons do not. And so when prisoners from the U.S. prison system get released, they don't know what to do with themselves. But this is the kind of prison that is possible because other countries are doing it. Prison, as Angela Davis said, prison relieves us of the responsibility of seriously engaging with our problems, with the problems of our society, especially those produced by racism and increasingly global capitalism. And this also applies to policing. The fact that we throw all these responsibilities on police departments and give them half of the city budget is basically saying that, well, we can't solve these any other way, or we don't want to sit down and think about how we can solve these social problems any other way, so we'll just leave it up to the police. The fact is, the police do very little in the way of prevention. They do a lot of responding after something has happened, something adverse has happened, and along the way, they don't always, but they can do a lot of damage, as we see by the police killings of more than 1,000 black and brown people every year. So I'll stop there. Thank you very much, and I'll turn off my screen sharing.
All right, thank you, Dr. Lin. I'm getting some feedback here. We'll go into the question and answers section right now. So if anybody has a question, please use the raise hand feature, which is under the participants window. I have a question in the chat that I want to get to first, because that was posted a little earlier. That was from Kanita. She asks, how will reform happen with police unions outspending all police reform advocates?
That's a great question. It goes to the bigger question of money and politics. And of course, I know, there's there's the issue of money in elections, but there's also money in between elections, right? Special interests, buying votes on city councils and so on. But the only way I can say is that there has to be a counter lobby, and I think that the Black Lives Matter movement opens that up, because there are so many people now who understand much better the real issues, and then the other aspect is the bigger effort to get money out of politics, and it's something that we have to do if we are to make our democracy respond to people and not corporations and special interests.
Okay. Yeah, it sounds like we're actually getting some of these reforms done in some places, so it's got to be possible.
Mm-hmm.
So I have Senna and Alex are first up. They'll have to unmute themselves.
Yeah, I was wondering, in Sunnyvale, they've combined the police and the fire departments. And you've seen it, the police then have some interface with the people other than controlling them. And I was wondering if there are any statistics that say that's got some effect on police violence.
Yes, if I understand, I couldn't hear the question fully, but if you're saying that there's this aspect of, police being trained to control a situation results in a lot of police violence.
Yeah, but I'm saying also that the police in Sunnyvale are also the fire department.
Yes.
They have a different view.
Right. So that is, Sunnyvale is innovative in that respect, and so it's one way, and I'm just so glad that some cities are trying out a different model. But it is true that if you look at the videos of these police killings of black and brown people, that it's always about police trying to establish control that is, well beyond what is necessary. So when we look at those reforms and ask the question, okay, is the use of force only, limited only to what is necessary? And the answer is, in all these cases, that it was on the contrary. It was much more than necessary, because the police are trained to establish a level of control which not just allows them to dominate a situation, but gives them a so-called margin of safety, that if one thing fails, then they still have that control. It's just like when they stop a car, they may ask for backup, and then three additional police cars will show up to stop one vehicle. It's an overkill, and then the other police car should say, okay, one is enough, and then they should leave, but they don't. And but it's part of the current training, and so a lot of this is about taking these principles in eight count weight and figuring out how to implement them with certainty in practice.
Okay. Well, I think accidentally hit to go with Essie. You'll have to unmute yourself.
Sorry. Yes. Hi. Thank you, Mr. Sharat, for having this. It's very informational, and I think a lot of the ideas you've said is really needed, and we should follow it up, because I was looking at a Michael Moore movie about how prisons in other countries, as you've shown, treat their prisoners to be better citizens. When they leave, they become better citizens. Here, it's a revolving door, because the prisons are owned by a group of profit-making organization that loves to have more prisoners so they can get more money. And they just don't train them enough, so when they let them go with a few dollars in their pocket, with no help from outside, they just come back again. That's what they want. Those companies should be held accountable.
Absolutely. Yeah.
Thank you.
Thank you. Excuse me, I need to just take a 1 minute break.
Okay. When he comes back, we'll go with Dick Hewitson. I'm going to go ahead and unmute you, Dick, so you can be prepared, but he stepped away from the computer. Ah. Hope everybody's doing all right otherwise. And not choking on all the smoke from the fires. Sounds like he's coming back.
There he is.
Sorry about that.
It's okay. Hi, is my turn now?
Yep.
Okay. Hi, Mr. Lin. Thank you so much. I want to bring up something that you talked about at the beginning, the protests, Black Lives Matter. And I've been watching all of this in light of my experience almost 50 years ago in the gay rights movement. And back then, the police were not our friends. But when we had protests, they were organized. And of course, we didn't have the internet to get the word out. But they were organized, and we had safety monitors as part of our group to see to it that the group stayed together. And sometimes there were counter protesters, but the police were always there to protect us. And an example of that is in 1978, when Anita Bryant was our enemy, and we lost our ordinance in St. Paul. When we had our gay rights rally in a park, there were men and women in Nazi uniforms marching around the perimeter. But everything was peaceful, and we knew the police were there to protect us and them. Is this whole concept of the police being there to protect us disappeared?
Yeah, so I would, my own experience with police many decades ago varies. In some cases, they were doing their proper function, which was to keep pedestrians or marchers separated from, say, the traffic. In other cases, I know that when I was participating in either anti-war or protests in Berkeley, I was a student in Berkeley, or protests relating to ethnic studies, starting ethnic studies programs and such. That there were many cases where police were acting in a very hostile way, and of course there were some that I witnessed where there was tear gas being used, and so it varies. Just as during the Trump inauguration, the January 20th, that I showed. But one thing I have observed is that nowadays, I mean, during these Black Lives Matter protests, since the end of May, I personally have probably participated in something like 50 or 60 protests, and there are a number of them which marched on a street that went past freeway on-ramps and off-ramps, and for the most part, police did nothing to protect us from the off-ramps. Now the off-ramps are problematic because you've got traffic slowing down from freeway speeds on those off-ramps, and if there's no traffic light at the end of the off-ramp, they are prepared to enter the street at fairly high speed, and the police did nothing to set up a roadblock there to protect the marchers. And what happened in one of the marches was that the highway patrol was there, but they were there for the opposite reason, which was they blocked the off-ramps and on-ramps to make sure the marchers didn't get onto the freeway. That was their concern. They weren't concerned about the speed of the traffic coming off the off ramps. So yeah, I mean, I see that as they're prioritizing controlling the marches and containing them rather than the safety of people who are on foot. I can see that.
So this whole idea of there being peace officers is no longer true?
Well, it's. I don't think one can make that kind of a generalization. So, I mean, if there is if there is an armed civilian, they will respond to that situation.
Oh, yeah.
I guess.
Well, I understand that, but as I see, it just seems to me that my experience in the past, of course, was a different part of the country too. That may have had something to do with it. But the police were there to protect us.
Yeah, I mean, so to the extent that was the case, I mean, we need to go back to that. We need to re-educate ourselves about what does it mean to keep the peace, and focus on that. Focus on preventing violence rather than starting it. I mean, in every case when there was violence in San Jose, what I observed is that when there were marches in the absence of police, there was no violence, and the violence only started after the police came and tried to establish control over certain areas, and they would their presence, their actions, such as declaring the protesters to be in an illegal assembly. They haven't done anything wrong. They're simply occupying a space. Now that space may be in the street, or it may not be. But the moment you take peaceful protesters and declare them to be in an unlawful assembly, I'm asking, so what is unlawful about it? The Constitution guarantees us the right to assemble.
Well, I think another thing too, in the situation I'm talking about, is that we planned the protest and we had a permit for it.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Well, there are some organizers get permits, some don't. I mean, if it's it depends. It's all. I mean, I can tell you a little bit about the calculations that go on for this. I mean, if it's a small march, the thinking is that it's not going to affect too much, and it's either going to be some of them will be on the sidewalk, some of them will occupy one lane of a multi-lane street, so the traffic can still get through. And others say, well, if we are too many, then we will by default control the street, and particularly in the times of Black Lives Matter, which is about not wanting to have anything to do with the police. Mm-hmm. Then nobody's getting a permit for that. But the people who used to get permits, like the Women's March, would get permits. But they would pay thousands of dollars for those permits. I mean, they included. These permits would also mandate that they do certain things, like they would have to have a certain number of porta potties, and so it would result in a huge expense that only the Women's March could afford. And that's why other organizations will do everything they can to avoid getting those permits.
Okay, we need to move on. We got a lot of hands up, and I don't think we're going to be able to have enough time before general discussion to get to it. But thanks, Dick. And we're going to move on to Ray. Grayson B.
All right. Thanks for your talk. I enjoyed it. And I have a question. I'd like your opinion on an approach to helping to solve or reduce this problem. I get emails from Color of Change periodically, and last week I got one that I replied to with a suggestion. And it seems to me that all of the police killings and unlawful activity are human rights violations. And we have been trying for decades to solve this problem with no meaningful results. So my suggestion to Color of Change was, why not try and get the UN involved in solving this human rights violation? That same day, I heard a piece on the radio of the UN being called into some dictator-controlled country to help with human rights violations. We have these here in the U.S. Should we be contacting the UN for help?
Well, it's a good point. It should be. I think the human rights violations in the United States should be raised in international forums. It doesn't mean that those international institutions can do much about it. Even the international justice system has difficulty dealing with it. And so I'll give you an example of the U.S. response to the International Criminal Court, the ICC. So the United States has not itself joined. It's not a member or a signatory to the ICC, or at some level, it's not part of it. So it does not feel that it is subject to the decisions of the ICC. When the ICC recently decided to take up the case of U.S. Unjustified U.S. killings in Afghanistan, the United States responded by not just saying that we're going to ignore the ICC, but that we're going to slap sanctions on the ICC. Not only on the ICC, but on anyone who helps the ICC will be sanctioned. And those of you who heard my talk on sanctions will know how all-encompassing and how powerful the U.S. sanctions are. So the problem is dealing with the superpower. I mean, yes, the issues need to be raised in international bodies. Black Lives Matter protests have already happened all over the world, so people are aware of it. But ultimately, the change has to come from within. It's up to the American people to change the system here.
So I don't think these dictators recognize the authority of this body either, but maybe they don't have the power to make the UN and this international human rights violation watchdog be afraid of it. Like maybe they're afraid of the UN.
Right. It's. I mean, so if the big powers, in particular the United States, get behind it, they can force. You know, they can pressure dictators in smaller countries and use human rights as the pretext, but to force the United States to force the world's sole superpower into compliance is a whole different matter.
Okay.
I did put that text of that email to Color of Change in the chat.
All right. Looks like we have time for one more question. It's from Helen. And before we go into a general discussion.
Yeah, I'm trying to remember. I want to say somebody said something about. Let me see if I can remember my question. What was it? I've almost lost the track of my thought. I'm sorry. I should have written it down. I didn't know how soon I would get. Do
you want to think about it for a minute? And just
I need to think about it and wait and put it in general. Sorry about that, everybody.
Go ahead and ask it in the general discussion, which we'll go into right now. So we have a couple people with their hands up still, but what I'll do is I'll open up the chat so everybody can unmute themselves. And, so everybody should be able to unmute themselves. So let's go ahead and give Dr. Lynn a round of applause here.